So today, I just want to quickly talk about a very interesting topic in SwiftUI, that is a dependency injection, and also how to use SwiftUI async way to actually accomplish that. So here is actually a really simple really simple JSON data here that has a array of a dictionary. It's pretty standard. So let's get started. So I have already previewed the data model layer and also a really simple list view that's in the playground. And also we actually give some actually additional feature that we can use a task and a refreshable. But I think that we can focus on that later. So let's comment out this code there for now. So we just want to really simply to show the UI first. So let's just say hello world. And we can test this out, see how it shows up. Here you go. Here's our hello world there. Don't have too much going on right now, but let's get started to building our initial network layer here. So basically, we're gonna use a dependency injection. So, but for now, I think from my approach here is, I think I'm gonna build a pretty generic network layer there, only returning the data and through me some errors if there is any. So let's get started with building the protocol. Let's just call it network interface. And I'm just gonna give a really simple function, fetch data. And I'm gonna pass in a parameter that's a URL. Then I'm gonna use async async throw to actually return me actually asynchronously return me any data or through me an error. And then we're gonna create a class that's called network layer. Actually called network session, but you can call whatever. But the most important thing is inherit the protocol and to actually implement the protocol here. So you can just start typing by fetch data and it will show up everything. But one very important thing here is actually, I think we want to capture the URL session. Since the URL session itself actually has so many features, we don't know. Assuming potentially if this piece of code going to be used by somebody else or some other project, this code here should still working properly and returning the data from the API without any issues. So let's do a custom init. Let's call it URL session. And then we're going to give a URL session type, and then we're going to give a default value to it. And here is something really important. We're going to use this one here, a session configuration that uses a no persistent storage for caches, cookies, or credentials. You can choose this one, or you can just use the default. We can actually use this one here, since so eventually we're gonna write our own URL cache, like a cache layer for whenever we want to caching the images. But of course, you can definitely create another session and pass this in. Okay, so let's continue here. Let's assign this URL session to our variable on top. So we can capture that. We can keep the variables private so nobody can access. Oh, I'm missing something here. All right. And then we can start to implement the functionality of this fetch data. We can just use the really basic SwiftUI version of the new async URL session, which is something like this, something called data from, which is a async through. Is a convenient method that to load the data using URL, creates and resumes an URL session data test internally, so that it actually saves a lot of time and saves a lot of lines of code, because traditionally you have to call in the URL session, share and data task, and also resuming and handling all the things in a completion block. But in this way, actually super simple. Let me just quickly show you. Basically, it actually returns a tuple. So we can returning a tuple of data and the data response. And if there's any error from the API, actually just throw it back to us. So then we can handle that way. And we can just quickly call it like a try away URL session. Then data from the URL. And the next thing is usual. We still need to handle the normal HTTP response. So we can just, for the demonstration purpose, I'm gonna quickly handles the HTTP response with a, assuming that returning response is actually 200 code. So it will be HTTPS response equal to response. Oh, I missed the type there. Response as a HTTPS URL response. Then HTTP response. Let me just call it HTTP URL response to keep it consistent. So HTTP response set our status code equals if equals 200, then we continue. Otherwise, we're gonna throw a error back for the URL error. We're gonna use the built-in error code, and we're just gonna call it bad server response for now. Otherwise, we're gonna return the data. So that should be our pretty simple generic network layer. Then for now, we want to actually create a view model layer for the SwiftUI code there. For the SwiftUI project or the sample, so that we can actually adding more logic to the view model layer and properly utilize the network interface to trigger any API calls. And also we can dependency inject into it. So so that we can eventually create a class that's called a mock network session. Then you can also just using the network interface, then you should be able to send whatever data back through this mock network session, and we can dependency inject into the view model layer, so that you can actually doing a proper unit test and decoupling the modules and increase the reusability of the code. Okay, so for the view models layer, let's create a class called a view model. And since we're using SwiftUI views, then I think it's a good idea to use the observable object and to publish the data. For more, if you have any questions on the observable object or publish, please stay tuned. And then I'm gonna definitely post some videos about it. But feel free to comment down below and ask any question you have. So observable object, and then we're gonna actually capture the network session here. So we can call a var network session. Network session. And then we're gonna use network interface instead. And we're gonna initializing this class with a network session. And we're gonna give a type interface, network interface, and we're gonna give a default value of the class that we created above. So that way, by default, you can directly use this, the class we created above, to make a proper API calls, or you can dependency inject a mocked version to actually test out the view model's logics. Now we have to capture them and pass it in a network session. And now we want to create our API code or our logic code to handle properly for the data that we will be downloading from this endpoint. And it will be parsed into with this data model here. So we can have a proper data there. For now, we also want to publish the data whenever we download it. So let's call employees. And we're gonna, and then we're gonna create an empty, basically an empty employee array, just in case. And we will definitely properly handle that optional there as well. And also we're gonna use a main actor to make sure that all the data come back, stay on the main thread. All right, so let's call this function get API data. And we probably don't need to pass in anything at this moment, but of course, for your own code there, you can definitely pass in whatever things you might need, or you can have another function that wrap around this this function here to adding some additional logics as well. It's truly depending on how you're gonna handle your own code or your own project. Next, we want to do a quick quick garlet to double check the API the string, the URL, the API URL string, to make sure that string is actually good, that can actually so that we can actually reach to the URL. URL equal to URL, and then let's call it string and call it API data. Otherwise, we definitely want to throw some error back, and let's just call URL URL error, and we're just gonna say bad URL. Next, we want to definitely make an API call from the network session there. So I know we want to capture whatever the response data is. So let's say let response data equal to try away network session dot fetch data. Let's just pass in this URL, and then we want to decode that to our proper data model, so we can actually properly utilize all the data and show on the SwiftUI view. So let's just call employee response equal to try JSON decoder. At this point, you don't really have to use a wait, just normal standard try, and JSON decoder and decode. You could actually do a do catch here to handle to properly handle the try, to properly handling anything that throws back. Or for my demonstration, I'm just gonna throw everything onto the UI, and then potentially eventually can create a log or something to show the user. So here we can just say the employee. I think what's called an employee response and self from the data. From the response data. And then we want to assign the data to our employees. So we can publish that data to the UI level. Employee response down employees. Now we should already, now this should be dependency injected, view model, and the network layers. and each of them will be decoupled, and they're not really bound to each other. It's only depending on their interfaces, the type of interface they're using. So we can so here we are actually having a variable dependency injection, and then also we have a parameter dependency injection as well. And this just to hiding the variable from anybody trying to access it. You can only construct it, and it will use whatever the network interface that you provided. And same as here as well. You might have different configuration of the URL session. Here just give you the flexibility to choose whatever URL session, the configuration you might need it. Or you can just use the default version as well. And also, since we're going to handle our own URL cache, so that's why I'm choosing this one here, this configuration here, so that by default the URL session does not handle any caching for us. All right, so we can actually start to go in the SwiftUI view code and creating our state object with the view model. And then we can also re-enable those code down below here. So now we can check, we actually probably handled the optional for the employees. I'm gonna temporary handles right here. Okay, I'm gonna remove the hello world there. So now we should already have the data from the employee. Oh wait, there's one more thing. We have to enable the .task. So whenever this view shows, it will attempt to make the API calls, and it will wait for they will wait for this function to complete, and then if there's a data, it will be published to the employees. Otherwise, it will print an error down below. All right, let's see. Let's test out with the print out a list of texts from employee. This is called full name. All right, let's test this out. And here you go. As you can see, the application shows a list of the names, full names. We can definitely confirm the data there with the API, which, as you can see, is right here, full name. And full name is the same as on the sample app. And next, we can also enable the refreshable to do the exactly same thing. We can definitely take them out into a single function, so we can remove the duplication code here. So let's just quickly do that. Let's just call a function process API data. And I think you also need to call async since we're calling all the things asynchronously. And we can just do this right here. I think it was we need to call await, then process data, API data. And I believe it's the same for this. But I think it might need a task block to block out asynchronous functions. But I think it should be fine there. Let's give it a try. All right, and we actually showed up properly. Let's see a refresh. There we go. So you should not see any changes because the data all the same. Unless there's some data have not showed up, then the refreshable definitely will help. So this is how you build a dependency inject network layer and a view model in SwiftUI with async awaits. And you can definitely find the code on my GitHub account, and I will post that down below. And thank you for watching, and please subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys next time.